woman that had an affair with this man who took out his whole family. And I take a step back and it's just like, I didn't know. Like, he's so disgusting. I'm so ashamed of him and everything. And I just, oh, those little girls. They're so little. They're so little.
We talked a little bit earlier about getting some help for these things, and we can provide that.
Okay.
At really no cost.
Oh, we just want to make sure there's resolution.
Absolutely.
That's why we come to you guys to
Yeah.
pound it down until there's nothing left.
I'm sorry that you're talking again today. I really am. I don't want to put you through any more trauma than you've already been through. There is reasons for everything that we're doing today and what occurred. And I'm sorry. I genuinely am sorry. These are not things that we like to do twice. It's the same thing with other types of victims from other crimes. We want to do it once and we want to be done. Unfortunately, we didn't know yesterday what we know today, and that's why we're here, because we need this video. And I am sorry, because I know it's hard to talk about it.
God, it's so sad, and she's pregnant.
And you know, on our end, we didn't.
And they're so cute. They're so little. Like, why? Why? How? I don't even understand how you could, like, bring yourself to do that to somebody who's, like, that big.
Do you want to step out for a minute?
No, I just need to chill with my eyes closed for a sec.
If you're drawn to the stories hidden in the shadows, subscribe to Dark Corner True Crime, where every case has a secret waiting to be uncovered.
The investigation into the murders of Shanann Bella and Celeste Watts reached a legal conclusion with blistering speed. Yet the shadows cast by the Discovery Files remain a source of intense public scrutiny years later. To understand why a reinvestigation into the role of Nichole Kessinger is not merely a product of internet speculation, but a demand for forensic closure, one must look at the digital ghost left behind in her mobile device. When the Colorado Bureau of Investigation released the sprawling 2,000-page discovery, it contained a chilling anomaly that sits like a landmine in the timeline. A data extraction report from Kessinger's phone indicated that she had searched for Shanann Watts in September 2017. This was nearly a year before the murders occurred, and months before she claimed to have ever met Chris Watts at their shared workplace, Anadarko Petroleum. While some technical experts have theorized that this could be a software glitch or a caching error in the forensic tool used at the time, the specificity of the search remains an unresolved point of high-stakes suspense. If the date is accurate, it suggests that the chance encounter that led to the affair was anything but accidental, pointing instead toward a long-term premeditated fixation on the Watts family. The suspicion surrounding Kessinger deepens when examining her behavior during the critical hours of August 13, 2018. Before she ever made contact with the police, she engaged in a massive manual purge of her digital life. Forensic analysts noted that Kessinger didn't just delete a few embarrassing texts. She engaged in a scorched earth policy, scrubbing her search history, call logs, and thousands of text messages. The sheer volume of deleted data suggests a level of panic that contradicts her later portrayal as a helpful witness who was simply tricked by a married man. It raises the question of why a witness would destroy evidence before she even knew a crime had officially been reported. This manual deletion occurred during the very window when Chris Watts was disposing of his family's bodies at the Servi 319 oil site, creating a vacuum of information that investigators at the time did not fully recover. The most physical piece of evidence calling for a reinvestigation is the Frederick ping, On the morning of the murders, at approximately 6:16 a.m., Kessinger's cell phone pinged a tower in Frederick, Colorado. This is the same town where the Watts family lived and where the murders had just taken place. Kessinger lived in North Glen, and her usual route to work did not necessitate being in Frederick at that hour. When questioned, her explanation was vague, and the lead investigators occupied with the rapid-fire confession of Chris Watts did not press her for a minute-by-minute accounting of her location during that time frame. In a modern context, using advanced cellular mapping and GPS trilateration that has improved significantly since 2018, this ping represents a massive hole in the narrative. The proximity of the mistress to the crime scene during the exact window of the disposal is a factual instance that remains as haunting today as it was when the files were first unsealed. The story of the Watts family is often told as the tragedy of one man's snapped psyche, but the digital footprints left by the woman in the periphery suggest a much more complex and perhaps collaborative mystery that has never been fully aired in a court of law. The transition from a casual witness to a person of interest often hinges on the smallest verbal slip, and in the case of Nichole Kessinger, her formal interviews with the Frederick Police Department and the FBI provide a masterclass in shifting narratives. As investigators sat across from her in those early days of August 2018, the atmosphere was thick with the tension of a ticking clock. Kessinger presented herself as a woman deceived, a victim of a man who had lied about the state of his...
Any kind of statements that you were like, whoa, that was weird. Or why would he say that? Or why did he mention that? Do you understand what I'm looking for?
No, I completely understand. I just feel like some of this happened so long ago that I can't tell you like the exact words of the exact conversation at the exact time and place, because it's like we had a lot of conversations. I mean, we talked every single day, so it's
if there's
like I'm trying to help you guys with the stuff like the stuff that's more current. I can give you guys a lot more like detail and exact times, but when you're asking me about something that happened 6 weeks ago and exactly what was said, it's like, I mean, I'm sure I can give you a general idea, but to be honest with you, like to pinpoint exact words, it's not going to happen.
I'm not looking for exact words, just more, let's say 6 weeks ago he said something that triggered with you last night. That's what I'd be looking for. Or something 4 weeks ago. And if you don't remember where it was or the specific words, that doesn't matter. Just he said something that was off the wall, or he said this or he said that, that has caused you a moment to pause and you go, wow, I wonder why he said that, now knowing what you know today. Do you understand? Doing it for us.
Yes.
We don't have the equipment with us to do it, and I asked them to do it for us. They're not involved in this investigation. He would just be a computer person. He would not be looking at any of this stuff. That would fall to myself. So keep that in mind. He's not involved in this investigation. Thornton PD has nothing to do with this, other than letting us use their facility and helping us with some electronic download. He's not going to look at your phone right now. He's going to put it on a disc and they're going to give it to me.
Gotcha. I don't know, what do you think? I really want to help you guys. I do. I feel like this whole thing is just going to be crazy regardless.
Marriage. However, a granular look at the transcripts reveals a pattern of minimized involvement that clashes violently with the reality of the evidence. One of the most glaring instances of this occurs during her discussion of the night of August 12th, the very last night Shanann, Bella, and Celeste were seen alive. Forensic phone records later revealed a phone call between Chris Watts and Nichole Kessinger that lasted exactly 111 minutes. This nearly 2-hour conversation took place while Shanann was traveling home from a business trip. Yet when Kessinger was asked about the contents of that marathon call, she claimed she could not remember a single detail of what was discussed. This 111-minute silence is a factual void that defies human nature. In a relationship she described as new and exciting, a 2-hour conversation on the eve of a triple homicide is not something that simply slips the mind. Suspense builds when one considers that Chris Watts was likely preparing for the horrific acts he would commit just hours later. The fact that investigators at the time did not push harder to recover the context of this call or use more aggressive interrogation tactics to break that memory loss is a primary reason why advocates call for a reinvestigation today. It wasn't just a lapse in memory, it was a strategic wall. Furthermore, Kessinger's timeline of when she learned Chris was still married shifted multiple times during her interviews. Initially, she claimed she had no idea the separation wasn't final, but her own Google searches told a different story. The data showed her looking up Shanann Watts and her Thrive business months prior, suggesting she knew exactly who Shanann was and that she was very much still the mistress of the house on Saratoga Trail. Beyond the phone calls, the physical behavior Kessinger exhibited during her interactions with law enforcement raised immediate red flags that were seemingly sidelined in the rush for a confession. During her interviews, she frequently spoke in the third person or used distancing language when referring to the children, yet she showed a chillingly specific interest in the public perception of her own image. She famously asked investigators if her name would be released and if her life was over before the bodies of the children had even been recovered from the oil tanks. This instance of self-preservation over empathy is a hallmark of the psychological profile that many believe warrants a deeper behavioral analysis. When she finally handed over her phone, it wasn't just the deleted texts that were suspicious. It was the fact that she had researched how much money do Amber Frey and her book deal make, and did people hate Amber Frey? Comparing herself to the mistress in the Scott Peterson case before the Watts family was even confirmed, Dead suggests a level of calculation that goes far beyond a shocked girlfriend. The most haunting discrepancy in Chapter 2 of this investigation remains the shimmering lack of a solid alibi for the early morning hours of August 13th. While Chris Watts was at the Survey 319 site, Kessinger's movements were never fully verified by independent surveillance. She claimed to be at home or heading to work, but the 6:16 a.m. ping in Frederick places her in the immediate vicinity of the crime's aftermath. In any other high-profile murder case, a person with such close proximity, an intense motive to remove the obstacle of a wife and children, and a proven track record of deleting evidence would be treated as a primary suspect, or at least a co-conspirator. The decision to grant her what was effectively a free pass in exchange for her cooperation is a point of factual contention that continues to fuel the demand for the case to be reopened. The interviews weren't just a search for truth. They were a series of missed opportunities to hold a second party accountable for the silence that followed the 111-minute call. In the aftermath of the Watts family murders, the digital forensic analysis of Nichole Kessinger's devices revealed a series of Google searches that paint a picture of a woman focused on self-preservation and the potential for personal gain, even as the search for the missing family was still active. These searches, documented in the official discovery files, represent some of the most compelling evidence for those who argue that her role in the timeline remains inadequately explored. While the public was glued to the news of a missing pregnant mother and 2 toddlers, Kessinger was reportedly typing queries into her phone that focused on her own future and the legal ramifications of her proximity to a killer. One of the most striking instances found by investigators was Kessinger's preoccupation with Amber Frey, the mistress of Scott Peterson. In August 2018, as the investigation was heating up, Kessinger searched, "Did people hate Amber Frey?" and "Amber Frey book deal." She also looked into Frey's net worth, suggesting that even before the bodies of Shanann, Bella, and Celeste were recovered, Kessinger was already drawing parallels between herself and one of the most famous mistresses in American criminal history. This choice of research indicates a level of calculation that is deeply unsettling. It suggests she was not just a concerned girlfriend helping the police, but someone assessing the brand damage or even the potential profitability of her situation. Suspense in this chapter of the investigation is heightened by the technical nature of her inquiries regarding law enforcement capabilities.
He's going to take this all the way to trial.
I do, right now.
Have they gotten no discoveries yet?
No. They have some stuff.
Do you think that's going to change when they get those? Do they know that I'm like one of your witnesses?
Yeah, I mean, they have to know. Do they know what you said yet? No.
Factual records show that after the murders, but before Chris Watts had fully confessed, Kessinger searched for phrases like, "Can cops trace text messages?" and "Can police see deleted messages?" These searches were conducted during the same window of time that she was manually scrubbing her own phone of nearly all evidence of her relationship with Chris. The point of contention for many observers is why an innocent witness, who claimed to have nothing to hide, would be so concerned with the recovery of deleted data. If her goal was truly to assist the FBI, the destruction of her communication logs and subsequent research into whether that destruction was permanent creates a narrative of obstruction that was never fully litigated. Furthermore, her search history in the weeks leading up to the tragedy contradicts her claims of being an unwilling participant in a messy separation. On July 24, 2018, she searched for "man I'm having affair with says he will leave his wife," and by August 8th, she was looking up wedding dresses and topics related to marrying your mistress. These instances demonstrate that the relationship was not the casual 2-month fling she initially described to police, but a deeply rooted obsession with a future that required the total removal of Chris's current family. When these premeditated searches are viewed alongside her post-murder inquiries into police tracking, the factual gaps in her story become impossible to ignore. A reinvestigation today would likely use modern data recovery to find exactly what was in those messages she was so desperate to ensure the police could not trace. The logistics of what occurred at the Survey 319 oil site on the morning of August 13, 2018, remained some of the most physically haunting and technically baffling elements of the entire case. While the official narrative places Chris Watts at the site alone, a factual analysis of the site's layout and the timeline of his arrival raises significant questions about the physical possibility of a single individual performing such a complex disposal in so short a window. Chris arrived at the remote field at approximately 6:46 a.m. By the time his coworkers arrived later that morning, he had supposedly unloaded his wife's body, excavated a grave in the hardened, sun-baked Colorado earth, and transitioned the bodies of his 2 daughters through 8-inch hatches into the crude oil tanks. The sheer manual labor required for these tasks, performed in a state of high adrenaline and visible exposure, creates a point of suspense that many believe suggests the presence of a second set of hands. The instance that most frequently draws the eyes of investigators back to the oil site is the recovery of the bodies themselves. To reach the top of the oil tanks, one must climb a steep, narrow metal staircase. Chris claimed he carried the girls up these stairs and pushed them through the small openings. However, forensic experts have noted that the physical exertion required to move 3 separate bodies and perform a burial in a span of less than 2 hours is an extraordinary feat for one man, even one in peak physical condition. Furthermore, the discovery files mention a second set of footprints and unidentified tire tracks at the site that were never fully cast or matched, given that Nichole, Kessinger's phone, pinged a tower in Frederick, the town that serves as the gateway to these rural oil fields, at 6:16 a.m. The geographical proximity cannot be ignored. The 30-minute window between her phone ping and Chris's arrival at the site is a factual gap that has never been satisfactorily closed by a minute-by-minute GPS overlay. Suspense also surrounds the missing items from the crime scene that were never recovered. Several pieces of evidence, including the clothes the girls were wearing and the specific tools used to open the pressurized thief hatches on the tanks, seem to have been handled with a level of precision that suggests a planned operation rather than a panicked aftermath. Investigators found a raked patch of dirt near the shallow grave where Shanann was buried, indicating that someone had taken the time to try and smooth over the evidence of the disturbance. This level of cleanup detail is often a hallmark of a collaborative effort where one person handles the heavy lifting while another manages the look of the scene to delay discovery. In the rush to secure Chris's confession, the site was not treated as a multi-suspect crime scene, and many believe that forensic evidence of a second person, potentially skin cells on the hatches or DNA on the raked earth, was lost to the elements. The most chilling factual detail of Chapter 4 involves the GPS data from Chris's work truck. While the truck's movements were tracked, the data only showed where the vehicle stopped, not who was in it, or if another vehicle was following in its wake. There is a period of dead air in the communication between Chris and Kessinger on that morning that contrasts sharply with their usual constant contact. Proponents of a reinvestigation argue that this silence wasn't due to a lack of contact, but rather a shift to a different, perhaps more secure, method of communication or physical proximity. If Kessinger was indeed in the Frederick area, as her phone ping suggests, the possibility that she met him at a secondary location or even at the perimeter of the oil site remains the largest unanswered logistical question of the case. The oil site was the final resting place for the Watts family. But for those seeking the full truth, it remains a site of unresolved forensic anomalies that point toward a much larger conspiracy. The neighborhood of Saratoga Trail was quiet in the pre-dawn hours of August 13th, but the digital eyes of the suburbs were watching. One of the most controversial and suspenseful pieces of evidence in the entire case is the security footage captured by Nate Trinastic's Vivint camera. This footage shows Chris Watts backing his white work truck into the driveway at 5:27 a.m. While the quality of the video is grainy and dominated by the glare of the truck's headlights, a close analysis reveals an instance that has haunted true crime analysts for years: a second shadow. As Chris moves back and forth between the garage and the truck bed, a distinct figure appears to emerge from the passenger side of the vehicle or the shadows of the garage, moving in a way that does not align with Chris's own physical movements. This shadow man or shadow figure represents a factual anomaly that was never addressed in the final sentencing. The suspense of the footage lies in the timing and the physics of the movement. At one point, Chris is seen standing at the rear of the truck, yet a shadow is seen moving near the front cabin, seemingly independent of his position. Observers have pointed out what appears to be a smaller figure walking toward the truck, which some believe was one of the children still alive at the time, but others insist it is the silhouette of a second adult, someone helping to coordinate the loading of the vehicle. If a second person was in that house or that garage, the entire prosecution's theory of a lone, snapped husband collapses. The presence of a collaborator we saw would turn a domestic tragedy into a calculated, multi-person conspiracy. Investigators at the time viewed the footage on a small television screen in the neighbor's living room, and while they noted the suspicious behavior of Chris Watts, who was clutching his head and acting agitated as he watched the playback, they did not perform a frame-by-frame forensic enhancement of the shadows during the initial 48-hour missing persons window. Factual discrepancies arise when comparing the footage to Chris Watts's later confessions. In his 2019 interview from a Wisconsin prison, Chris claimed he acted entirely alone, yet he struggled to explain the movements seen on the neighbor's camera. The footage shows the truck's cabin lights illuminating, a door opening, and what looks like a person standing by the passenger side. If Nichole Kessinger's phone pinged in Frederick at 6:16 a.m., she was in the immediate geographic area less than an hour after this footage was recorded. The possibility that she was the figure in the shadows, or that she met him shortly after he pulled out of that driveway, is a theory that hinges on the synchronization of the Vivint timestamps and the cellular tower logs. A reinvestigation using modern AI-driven video enhancement could potentially clarify these silhouettes, turning a blurry shadow into an identifiable person. The point of no return in this chapter of the investigation is the realization that the police did not secure the perimeter of the house immediately. This allowed for a window of time where a second person could have exited the residence through a back door or a window not covered by Trinastich's camera. The discovery files mention that when the police first entered the home, they found a basement window slightly ajar and a luggage bag that seemed out of place. This instance, combined with the Shadow Man footage, creates a narrative of a crime scene that was far more porous than the public was led to believe. The focus remained so heavily on Chris's psychological state that the physical evidence of an accomplice was treated as a peripheral conspiracy theory rather than a lead to be exhausted. To this day, the grainy footage from the house on Saratoga Trail remains the most visceral evidence that Chris Watts may not have been the only person standing in the dark that morning. In the standard protocol of a triple homicide investigation, the inner circle of the suspect is usually dismantled with surgical precision, yet the investigation into Nichole Kessinger's personal domain reveals a startling lack of traditional forensic aggression. One of the most glaring factual points in the case is the absence of a formal, immediate search warrant for Kessinger's apartment in North Glen during the critical first week. While the Watts household was being stripped of every fiber and digital footprint, Kessinger was permitted to hand-select what evidence she turned over to the authorities. This instance of voluntary discovery allowed for a massive gap in the chain of custody. By the time investigators truly realized the depth of the affair and the suspicious nature of her deleted data, any physical evidence that might have tied her to the Saratoga Trail home, such as DNA, transferred fibers, or even discarded items from the crime scene, could have been easily scrubbed away in the privacy of her own residence. The suspense of Chapter 6 lies in the Weld County procedural inconsistencies. Local law enforcement and the CBI were working under immense pressure to find a pregnant mother and 2 small children, a focus that naturally prioritized the where over the who else. However, when Kessinger's phone pinged in Frederick at 6:16 a.m., it should have triggered an immediate lockdown of her movements. Instead, she was treated with a level of professional courtesy rarely extended to the mistress of a man suspected of murdering his family. Factual. Records show that she was interviewed in non-interrogation settings, often appearing in park benches or casual environments rather than a recorded room at the precinct. This choice of setting meant that the psychological pressure usually applied to potential accomplices was virtually non-existent, allowing her to maintain a curated narrative without the stress testing of a formal interrogation. Furthermore, the discovery files reveal a suspicious lack of follow-up regarding Kessinger's work computer and her access to Anadarko Petroleum's GPS and site monitoring software. As a safety contractor, Kessinger had intimate knowledge of the remote oil sites, including CERVI 319. She knew which sites were active, which were being monitored by cameras, and which offered the most seclusion. An instance that remains unexamined is whether she accessed any site log data or satellite imagery in the days leading up to the murders. If she had used her professional credentials to scout a location for the disposal of the bodies, it would provide the smoking gun of premeditation. Yet, the investigation into her professional digital footprint was surprisingly shallow, with the authorities largely accepting her claim that she was just a bystander to Chris's workplace habits. The most contentious point of this chapter is the immunity question. While no formal immunity deal was ever made public, the speed with which the case was closed after Chris's plea deal led many to believe that a tacit agreement was reached. Kessinger's cooperation in exchange for her disappearance from the legal crosshairs. This procedural shortcut meant that the grand jury never had the opportunity to review the totality of her contradictions. A reinvestigation today would demand a look at the hidden files, the notes from the district attorney's office, and the unedited interviews to determine if the decision not to search her home was a tactical error or a deliberate choice to keep the case simple. The lack of a search warrant remains a factual vacuum in a case that otherwise prided itself on its exhaustive forensic reach. The psychological landscape of the Watts case is often viewed through the narrow lens of Chris's supposed snap, but a deeper, factual analysis of the simultaneous life theory suggests a much more calculated motive that required the involvement, or at least the intense psychological pressure, of a second party. This theory posits that Chris Watts wasn't just trying to escape a marriage. He was being coached or incentivized to reset his life entirely. The suspense in this chapter lies in the psychological power dynamic between Chris and Nichole Kessinger. Forensic psychologists who have reviewed the discovery files point to an instance of extreme ego feeding in their communication. Kessinger didn't just provide an affair, she provided a blueprint for a new identity. Her searches for marrying your mistress and her repeated demands for Chris to find a place for them to live created a high-pressure vacuum where the existence of Shanann and the children became a physical barrier to the beautiful life she was sketching out for him. A factual point of high interest is the dietary and physical transformation Chris underwent in the weeks leading up to the murders. Under Kessinger's influence, Chris became obsessed with his fitness, losing significant weight and using Thrive patches, the very product his wife sold, to fuel a manic level of energy. This physical shift coincided with a psychological detachment from his family. However, the suspenseful question remains, was this transformation a solo endeavor, or was it a shared mission? Kessinger's own search history reveals a preoccupation with giving a man his first son, despite the fact that Shanann was already pregnant with a boy, Nichole. This instance suggests a competitive psychological drive to replace Shanann in every capacity. When a mistress begins researching the net worth of a previous famous mistress like Amber Frey and looks up wedding dresses while her lover's wife is still in the house, it points to a level of psychological nesting that often precedes collaborative criminal behavior. The motive for a reinvestigation also hinges on the financial incentives and the insurance factor. Factual records show that the Watts family was in dire financial straits, facing a second bankruptcy and a lawsuit from their homeowners association. Kessinger, who was portrayed as a financially stable and independent professional, was acutely aware of Chris's baggage. In their 111-minute phone call on the night of August 12th, many believe the conversation didn't just cover their future, but the logistics of the debt. If the family was gone, the house could be sold, the debt erased, and a life insurance payout for Shanann, totaling nearly $450,000, would have been on the table. While Chris was the beneficiary, the psychological profile of the simultaneous life suggests that the person whispering in his ear would be the one to truly benefit from a debt-free partner with a massive cash influx. The most chilling instance in this psychological breakdown is Kessinger's behavior immediately following the missing persons report. While a normal person would be horrified to learn that their boyfriend's pregnant wife and children had vanished, Kessinger's first instinct was to research how long do people go to jail for and can police listen to my calls. This is not the behavior of someone concerned for the safety of children. It is the behavior of someone calculating the risk of exposure. The suspense here is the missing link between her influence and his action. Did she simply create the environment where he felt he had to kill, or did she actively participate in the planning phase to ensure her own future was secure? Without a reinvestigation into the psychological grooming that took place during those 111-minute calls, the why of this case remains half-told. The legal finality of the Chris Watts case has never managed to quell the ghost of a second participant, and the pathway to a reinvestigation lies in the intersection of evolving forensic technology and the unresolved data points buried in the discovery files. For a case to be reopened, new and material evidence must be presented, evidence that was either unavailable or overlooked during the initial 2018 investigation. Today, the most promising avenue for this is the digital resurrection of Nichole Kessinger's deleted data. In 2018, the extraction tools used by the FBI were advanced, but they were not infallible against manual scorched earth deletions. Modern AI-driven data recovery can now piece together fragmented clusters of information that were previously thought to be overwritten. If a reinvestigation were to recover even a handful of those deleted messages from the morning of August 13, it could provide the factual smoking gun that differentiates a witness from a co-conspirator. The suspense of a potential reopening also hinges on the Frederick ping and the application of modern geofencing. While investigators in 2018 knew Kessinger's phone hit a tower in the area, they did not have the sophisticated location tracking analytics used in high-profile cases today. By serving a geofence warrant on the area surrounding the Watts home and the CERV I-319 oil site, authorities could identify every mobile device that was active in those specific kill zones during the window of the crime. If Kessinger's device is found to have traveled in tandem with Chris's truck, or if a burner phone was active at the site, the lone wolf narrative would be legally dismantled. This instance of technological progress represents the greatest threat to the silence Kessinger has maintained since entering witness protection or moving into her new life. A significant point of interest for a modern grand jury would also be the financial and insurance inquiry. The initial investigation focused heavily on the act of murder, but less so on the secondary beneficiaries of the crime. By tracing the digital footprints of Kessinger's own financial state and her searches regarding life insurance and book deals in the weeks following the murders, a clearer picture of motive emerges. Factual inconsistencies in her testimony, such as her claim of not knowing Shanann was pregnant despite searching for her online, could now be used to impeach her credibility in a way that leads to a misprision of a felony or accessory after the fact charge. The legal threshold is high, but the sheer volume of instances where her story contradicts the data creates a compelling argument for a second look. Ultimately, the demand for a reinvestigation is not just about a singular obsession with a mistress figure. It is about the pursuit of absolute truth for the victims. The murders of Shanann, Bella, Celeste, and Nichole Watts were processed with a speed that favored a closed case over a comprehensive one. As long as the 111-minute call, the 6:16 a.m. ping, and the 2017 Google searches remain unexplained, the case remains a factual anomaly. A reinvestigation today wouldn't just be looking for a killer, it would be looking for the shadow that stood beside him. Until every digital fragment is recovered and every proximity alert is verified, the story of what happened on Saratoga Trail will remain an unfinished script, haunted by the possibility that justice was only partially served